Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of his mining mech suit. The red dust of Kepler 442b swirled around him in the alien wind. After 6 months on this godforsaken planet, he still wasn't used to the constant crimson haze that hung in the air. The mining colony of New Perth stretched behind him, a collection of prefab buildings and industrial equipment that humanity had dropped onto this world like seeds, hoping to grow into something profitable. The planet was supposed to be empty. That's what the surveys had said. No intelligent life, just valuable minerals buried deep in the rust-colored mountains. Marcus had signed up for the 3-year contract because the pay was good, and Earth had nothing left for him after Sarah died. Out here, surrounded by alien landscapes and the constant hum of machinery, he could almost forget the pain that followed him like a shadow. But today something was different. As Marcus secured his mech suit in the maintenance bay, he heard a sound that didn't belong. A soft chirping, almost like a bird. But there were no birds on Kepler 442b. The planet's ecosystem consisted mainly of hardy lichens and some kind of crystalline fungi that grew in the caves. Nothing that could make such a delicate sound. He followed the noise around the corner of the maintenance building, past the rows of parked hover trucks and drilling equipment. The sound was coming from a pile of discarded mining debris, chunks of rock and twisted metal that had been deemed worthless. Marcus approached carefully, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter on his belt. The colonies had strict protocols about unknown life forms. What he found made him stop in his tracks. Nestled between 2 pieces of broken machinery was a creature no bigger than his fist. It looked like something out of ancient Earth mythology, with iridescent scales that shifted from deep blue to silver in the alien sunlight. Tiny wings, translucent like soap bubbles, fluttered weakly on its back. But it was the eyes that captured Marcus completely. Large, intelligent eyes the color of Earth's ocean, filled with a pain and loneliness that he recognized all too well. The creature was injured. One of its delicate wings was torn, and Marcus could see scratches along its sides where it had probably tried to hide from the mining equipment. It chirped again, a sound so full of distress that Marcus felt his chest tighten. Without thinking, he knelt down and extended his hand slowly, the way he used to approach stray cats back on Earth. The little dragon, because that's what it had to be despite the impossibility of it, looked at his hand with those incredibly expressive eyes. For a moment, Marcus thought it would flee. Instead, it took a tentative step forward and pressed its tiny snout against his palm. The touch was warm, warmer than it should have been for such a small creature, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. A crack in the wall he had built around his heart after Sarah's death. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully scooped up the injured dragon. It weighed almost nothing, like holding a handful of autumn leaves. The creature made a soft trilling sound and nestled against his chest, its tiny claws gripping his workshirt. Marcus could feel its rapid heartbeat against his palm, a flutter of life that seemed too precious for this harsh world. Getting the dragon back to his quarters without being seen was easier than expected. The evening shift change meant most of the miners were either in the mess hall or the recreation dome. Marcus lived in one of the smaller habitat modules on the edge of the colony, a cramped space that he had chosen specifically because it offered more privacy. He had converted the small storage closet into a workshop where he tinkered with broken electronics, a hobby that helped pass the long Kepler nights. Once inside, Marcus set the dragon down gently on his workbench. Under the bright LED lights, he could see the extent of its injuries more clearly. The torn wing looked worse than he had first thought, and there were several deep scratches that might become infected if left untreated. The creature watched him with those intelligent eyes as he gathered his first aid supplies, tilting its head in a way that was almost human in its curiosity. Marcus had no idea how to treat a dragon, mythical or otherwise, but he approached it the same way he would treat any injured animal. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic, working as gently as possible while the dragon remained remarkably still. When he touched the torn wing, the creature made a sound that was heartbreakingly similar to a human whimper, but it didn't try to bite or scratch him as he worked. Marcus found himself talking to the dragon in the same soft voice he had once used with Sarah during her final days in the hospital. He told it about Earth, about the blue skies and green forests that no longer existed, except in protected biodomes. He talked about the mining operation, about the loneliness of space, about the way the twin suns of this system cast strange double shadows across the landscape. The dragon seemed to listen, its eyes never leaving his face, When Marcus finished bandaging the wing, the creature made a series of soft chirping sounds that almost sounded like it was trying to communicate. Marcus wished he could understand what it was trying to say, but the intent seemed clear enough. The dragon trusted him, despite having every reason to fear the humans who had invaded its world. As the artificial night cycle began and the habitat lights dimmed automatically, Marcus faced a dilemma. He couldn't report the dragon to colony administration, without risking its capture and probably dissection by the xenobiology team. But keeping it secret meant taking full responsibility for a creature he knew nothing about. A creature that, according to everything humans knew about this planet, shouldn't even exist. The dragon solved his dilemma by curling up in a corner of the workbench and falling asleep, its tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was oddly comforting. Marcus sat in his desk chair and watched it sleep, feeling something he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, he wasn't completely alone. Outside his small window, the alien landscape stretched endlessly under the light of two moons, painted in shades of red and silver. Somewhere out there, Marcus realized, there might be more creatures like this one, an entire ecosystem that the human surveys had missed or ignored. The implications were staggering, but for now, all that mattered was the small life sleeping peacefully on his workbench. Marcus Chen, who had come to this distant world to escape his grief, had found something he never expected to find again. A reason to hope. 3 weeks passed and Marcus found himself living a double life. During the day, he operated his mining mech like always, drilling deep into the planet's crust and extracting precious metals for shipment back to Earth. But every evening, he hurried back to his quarters to check on his secret companion, whom he had started calling Ember because of the way its scales seemed to glow with internal fire. The dragon was healing remarkably fast. The scratches had disappeared completely, and even the torn wing was mending at a rate that defied explanation. Ember had also grown noticeably larger, now about the size of a house cat, though still delicate enough that Marcus worried constantly about accidentally hurting it. The creature had developed a routine of sleeping curled up on Marcus's pillow, its warm presence helping him sleep better than he had in years. But it was Ember's intelligence that truly amazed Marcus. The dragon seemed to understand human speech, tilting its head thoughtfully when Marcus spoke and responding with a complex series of chirps, trills, and whistles that felt like genuine communication. Ember had learned to open simple containers, could operate the basic controls on Marcus's tablet, and had even figured out how to turn the habitat's environmental controls up and down to adjust the temperature. The breakthrough came when Marcus was reviewing geological survey data on his workstation. Ember had been perched on his shoulder, apparently watching the scrolling displays with interest when suddenly the dragon began making urgent, chittering sounds. Marcus paused the data stream and looked at his companion questioningly. Ember hopped down onto the desk and pressed one tiny claw against the screen, right over a section of the geological map that showed an unexplored canyon system about 50 kilometers from the mining site. The dragon made a series of melodic sounds that were different from anything Marcus had heard before, almost like a song. When Marcus didn't respond immediately, Ember repeated the gesture more insistently. Understanding dawned slowly. Marcus pulled up a more detailed view of the canyon system, and Ember's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The dragon's eyes widened, and it began making excited trilling sounds while pointing repeatedly at the screen. This wasn't just random behavior. Ember was trying to tell him something about that location. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep despite Ember's warm presence beside him. The implications of what had happened were staggering. If Ember was trying to guide him to a specific location, it suggested not only intelligence but knowledge of the planet's geography. Knowledge that could only come from being native to this world. But the surveys had been thorough, hadn't they? How could an entire species of dragon-like creatures have gone undetected? The next morning brought disturbing news. During the daily briefing, Colony Administrator Weber announced that the mining operation was ahead of schedule and that they would be expanding into new sectors. One of those sectors was the canyon system that Ember had indicated on the map. Construction crews would begin preliminary work within the week. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He glanced around the briefing room at his fellow miners, all of them focused on Weber's presentation about increased quotas and bonus payments for early completion. None of them suspected that they might be about to destroy something irreplaceable. After the briefing, Marcus made an excuse about needing to run diagnostics on his mech suit, and instead used his access codes to review the original planetary survey data. What he found made his blood run cold. The survey had been conducted entirely from orbit, with only limited ground-based sampling in areas deemed most valuable for mining. Vast regions of the planet, including the canyon system, had been classified as geologically insignificant and never properly explored. Marcus realized that humanity had made the same mistake it had made countless times throughout history. They had assumed that absence of evidence was evidence of absence. They had looked at Kepler 442b through the lens of profit and resource extraction, never considering that life might exist in forms and places they hadn't thought to examine. That evening, Ember seemed to sense Marcus's distress. The dragon perched on his chest as he lay on his narrow bunk, making soft, comforting sounds that reminded Marcus of a cat's purr. The creature's scales had taken on a deeper blue color, and Marcus noticed that they seemed to respond to emotional states, both his and Ember's. When the dragon was excited or happy, the scales shimmered with brilliant blues and silvers. When it was worried or sad, they darkened to deep indigo. Marcus made his decision. He couldn't let the mining crews destroy the canyon without knowing what was there. He couldn't let Ember's people, if there were more of them, suffer because of human ignorance and greed. But he also couldn't simply walk into Administrator Weber's office with a dragon on his shoulder and expect to be believed. Over the next few days, Marcus began planning. He had accumulated significant leave time during his months on the planet, and his maintenance schedule would give him a window of opportunity. His mining mech was equipped with long-range sensors and could operate independently for extended periods. If he filed the right maintenance reports and took advantage of the skeleton crew that worked the night shifts, he could reach the canyon system and investigate without raising immediate suspicion. The hardest part was deciding whether to bring Ember with him. The dragon's presence on his shoulder had indicated knowledge of the canyon, but taking it into potentially dangerous territory felt like a betrayal of the trust it had placed in him. On the other hand, Ember might be the key to understanding what they found there. The night before his planned expedition, Marcus sat at his workbench cleaning and checking his portable equipment. Ember watched from its favorite perch on a stack of technical manuals, occasionally offering helpful chirps when Marcus dropped a small tool or couldn't find something he was looking for. The dragon had learned to anticipate his needs with uncanny accuracy. As Marcus worked, he noticed something new in Ember's behavior. The dragon kept looking toward the small window that faced in the direction of the canyon system, and its scales flickered with colors Marcus had never seen before, deep purples and golds that seemed to pulse with an inner rhythm. When Marcus followed Ember's gaze, he could see nothing but the usual alien landscape under the light of the twin moons. But Ember could see something, or sense something, that Marcus's human senses couldn't detect. The dragon made a series of urgent whistling sounds and flew to the window, pressing its small body against the transparent aluminum, as if trying to push through it. For the first time since Marcus had found it, Ember seemed truly agitated, almost desperate. Marcus realized that his planned expedition wasn't just about scientific curiosity or even moral responsibility. Ember was trying to go home. The creature had been separated from its family, its people, possibly during the initial mining operations that had disrupted large sections of the planet's surface. The dragon had been alone and injured, probably for weeks or even months until Marcus found it. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical burden. This wasn't just about discovering a new species or preventing an environmental catastrophe. This was about reuniting a lost child with its family. The fact that the child was a dragon and the family was an unknown alien species didn't change the fundamental human decency of the situation. Marcus made his final preparations. But now his mission had a personal urgency that went far beyond scientific discovery. As he tucked Ember into a specially modified equipment bag that would keep the dragon safe and hidden during the journey, he whispered a promise that he hoped the creature could understand. Tomorrow he would take Ember home. The journey to the canyon system took most of the day. Marcus piloted his mining mech across the desolate landscape, following game trails and avoiding the main transport routes where other miners might spot him. Ember rode in the specially modified compartment Marcus had created, occasionally poking its head out to chirp directions when Marcus wasn't sure which path to take. The terrain grew more dramatic as they approached the canyon. What had looked like simple geological formations on the survey maps revealed themselves to be intricate networks of caves, overhangs, and hidden valleys. The rock here was different too, shot through with veins of some crystalline material that caught and reflected the sunlight in dazzling displays of color. Ember became increasingly excited as they drew closer to their destination. The dragon's scales shimmered with rapid color changes, and it made a constant stream of melodic sounds that Marcus was beginning to recognize as expressions of joy and anticipation. When they finally reached the canyon's edge, Ember practically vibrated with energy. Marcus parked the mech on a stable outcropping and activated its camouflage systems. The massive machine would be nearly invisible from aerial surveillance, blending in with the surrounding rock formations. He gathered his portable sensors and survival gear, then carefully lifted Ember from its travel compartment. The moment the dragon touched the canyon air, something extraordinary happened. Ember's scales erupted in brilliant patterns of light, colors so vivid they seemed to have physical weight. The dragon spread its now healed wings and took flight, soaring in joyful loops around Marcus's head before diving toward the canyon floor. Marcus rappelled down the canyon wall, following Ember's flight path. The dragon stayed close enough to guide him but far enough ahead to scout the terrain. As they descended, Marcus began to notice details that the orbital surveys had completely missed. The canyon walls were covered in intricate patterns that looked almost like writing, symbols carved or somehow grown into the rock face itself. The air in the canyon was different too. Where the surface of Kepler 442b was dry and harsh, the canyon held moisture and warmth. Marcus's instruments detected a complex ecosystem that seemed to exist nowhere else on the planet. Flowering vines cascaded down the canyon walls, their blossoms releasing spores that danced in the filtered sunlight like living glitter. Ember led him deeper into the canyon system, through passages that seemed designed for creatures that could fly. Marcus had to use his climbing gear repeatedly, but the dragon always waited patiently for him to catch up. The farther they went, the more obvious it became that this place was not just a geological formation. It was a habitat, carefully cultivated and maintained by intelligence. The first sign of other dragons came as they entered a vast underground cavern. Ember suddenly stopped flying and hovered in front of Marcus, making urgent warning sounds. Marcus activated his night vision and saw what had alarmed his companion. The cavern walls were covered with dragons, hundreds of them, all apparently sleeping or in some kind of dormant state. These were not baby dragons like Ember. They were magnificent creatures, some with wingspans of 20 feet or more. Their scales were darker than Ember's, deep blues and purples that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They hung from the cavern ceiling like massive bats, their wings wrapped around their bodies, their eyes closed in what looked like peaceful sleep. Marcus stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. One wrong move, one loud sound, and he could find himself facing hundreds of awakened dragons. He had no idea if they were dangerous, but their size alone made them potentially lethal. Ember, however, showed no fear. The small dragon flew confidently into the cavern, chirping softly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The sleeping dragons began to stir, their eyes opening to reveal the same ocean blue color as Ember's. But instead of the aggressive reaction Marcus had feared, the great dragons made sounds of welcome and joy, deep musical calls that echoed through the cavern like the songs of whales. Several of the largest dragons descended from the ceiling, their massive forms moving with surprising grace. Marcus pressed himself against the cavern wall, trying to make himself as small and non-threatening as possible. But the dragons paid him little attention. Their focus was entirely on Ember, who flew from one great dragon to another in an obvious reunion with family. One dragon, larger than the others and with scales that shimmered with silver highlights, approached Marcus directly. The creature's massive head came down to his level, and Marcus found himself looking into eyes that held intelligence, curiosity, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. The dragon made a series of low, rumbling sounds that Marcus felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. Ember flew to perch on the great dragon's head, making excited chittering sounds that were clearly explanatory. Marcus realized he was witnessing a conversation, with Ember telling its family about the human who had found and cared for it. The great dragons listened with obvious attention, occasionally making their own deep vocalizations in response. As the reunion continued around him, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what he had discovered. This wasn't just a hidden ecosystem or an unknown species. This was a civilization. The patterns on the canyon walls weren't random geological formations, but art, history, perhaps even literature created by beings who had inhabited this world long before humans arrived. The dragons weren't just intelligent animals. They were people in every sense that mattered. They had families, communities, culture. They had chosen to live in the deep canyons not because they were hiding, but because these places were their cities, their homes, their sacred spaces, and humanity was about to destroy it all in the name of mining efficiency and profit margins. Marcus felt sick as the full implications hit him. The mining operations had already disrupted the surface areas where dragons like Ember might have lived or traveled. The construction crews heading for this canyon would not just destroy habitat, they would be committing genocide against a species that had probably existed on this world for millions of years. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Marcus saw something that gave him hope. The great dragons were not just greeting Ember with joy. They were studying Marcus with obvious intelligence and curiosity. Several of them had approached close enough to examine his equipment, his clothing, his scent. They showed no fear, only interest. One dragon, its scales a magnificent deep purple shot through with gold, extended its neck toward Marcus's outstretched hand. The touch of its snout against his palm was warm and dry, exactly like Ember's had been, but on a much larger scale. The dragon made a sound that was unmistakably a purr, a vibration that Marcus felt through his entire body. Understanding passed between them without words. The dragon knew that Marcus had saved Ember. It recognized him as a protector, not a threat, and in that moment of connection, Marcus realized that the dragons might be willing to trust him enough to help him find a solution to the approaching disaster. The great dragon with the silver-highlighted scales approached again, this time carrying something in its claws. It was a piece of the crystalline material Marcus had seen in the canyon walls, but this sample was clearly worked, shaped into something that was part tool, part art, part technology. The dragon placed it carefully in Marcus's hands. The moment Marcus touched the crystal, his mind exploded with images. He saw the canyon system as the dragon saw it, a vast network of interconnected communities stretching for hundreds of kilometers underground. He saw the dragon's history, their art, their science. He saw their children being born in crystal nurseries that sang with harmonic frequencies. He saw their elders teaching philosophy through color and song, and he saw their fear. The dragons knew about the human mining operation. They had watched from hiding as the surface of their world was scarred and changed. They had rescued what young they could, but some, like Ember, had been lost in the chaos. The dragons were not primitives hiding in caves. They were an advanced civilization that had chosen to live in harmony with their planet, rather than dominating it. Their technology was biological and crystalline rather than mechanical, but it was sophisticated beyond anything humans had achieved. They could have driven the miners away easily, but they had chosen not to because they understood that violence would only lead to greater violence. When the vision faded, Marcus found himself surrounded by dragons of all sizes, from tiny juveniles no larger than Ember, to ancient elders whose scales had deepened to almost black with age. They were all looking at him with the same expression of hope and trust that Ember had shown when they first met. Marcus understood. He had been chosen as their ambassador, their link to humanity. The fate of an entire civilization now rested in the hands of one lonely miner who had simply been kind to a lost dragon. The return journey to the mining colony took on a desperate urgency. Marcus carried with him not just Ember, who had chosen to return with him despite being reunited with its family, but also 3 of the communication crystals that the dragon elders had entrusted to his care. The weight of an entire civilization's future pressed down on his shoulders as he navigated his mech through the alien landscape. Back at the colony, Marcus discovered that the situation had deteriorated even faster than he had feared. The construction crews were already mobilizing, and Administrator Weber had moved up the timeline for the canyon excavation by a full week. Corporate pressure from Earth was demanding faster resource extraction to meet quarterly projections. The dragons had perhaps 48 hours before the first drilling platforms would begin tearing into their ancient home. Marcus knew that a direct approach would fail. Simply walking into Weber's office and announcing the existence of an intelligent alien species would result in his immediate psychiatric evaluation and probably his removal from the planet. Even if he could convince someone to listen, the corporate interests driving the mining operation were too powerful to be swayed by environmental or ethical concerns. But Marcus had something that might change the equation entirely. The communication crystals the dragons had given him were more than just technological artifacts. They contained proof of intelligence, art, history, and scientific knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of the universe. If he could find the right person to show them to, someone with the authority and moral courage to act, he might be able to stop the excavation. Dr. Sarah Okafor was the colony's chief xenogeologist, a woman who had joined the expedition specifically to study alien ecosystems. Marcus had worked with her briefly during his first month on Kepler 442b and remembered her as someone who genuinely cared about scientific discovery rather than just profit margins. More importantly, she had the security clearance to contact Earth directly if she found something significant, enough to warrant corporate attention. Marcus waited until the late evening shift when most of the colony was asleep or in the recreation areas. Dr. Okafor typically worked late in her laboratory, analyzing rock samples and geological data. He found her bent over a microscope, studying what appeared to be crystalline formations. "Dr. Okafor?" Marcus said quietly from the laboratory doorway. "I need to show you something that could change everything we know about this planet." Sarah looked up, surprised to see the quiet miner, who usually avoided social contact. But something in his voice made her set down her work and give him her full attention. Marcus entered the lab, carefully closing the door behind him. Ember poked its head out of his equipment bag and Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "My God," she whispered. "What is that?" Marcus carefully lifted Ember from the bag and set the dragon on the laboratory table. Under the bright lights, Ember's scales shimmered with nervous blues and greens, but the dragon held perfectly still as if understanding the importance of making a good impression. "This is Ember," Marcus said. "I found it injured near the mining site 3 weeks ago. Dr. Okafor, this creature is intelligent. Not just smart for an animal, but genuinely intelligent. It understands human speech, it can operate simple technology, and it's been trying to communicate with me." Sarah approached the table slowly, her scientific training warring with her amazement. Ember watched her with those incredibly expressive eyes, tilting its head in a gesture that was unmistakably curious and friendly. When Sarah extended her hand, the dragon sniffed delicately at her fingers before allowing her to touch its scales. "The bone structure is completely unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history," Sarah murmured, her professional instincts taking over. "The wing membrane appears to be a form of living crystal lattice rather than organic tissue. And these scales, they're not just changing color, they're actually modulating light frequency in response to neural activity." Marcus pulled out one of the communication crystals. "There's more, much more. Ember isn't alone, Dr. Okafor. There's an entire civilization living in the canyon system that we're about to destroy." The crystal began to glow the moment Sarah touched it, responding to her brainwaves just as it had to Marcus's. The laboratory filled with soft harmonics as images flowed between the crystal and Sarah's mind. Marcus watched as her expression changed from skepticism to wonder to growing horror, as she realized what the mining operation was truly about to destroy. When the vision ended, Sarah sank into a chair, her face pale. "How many of them are there?" "Thousands, at least. Maybe tens of thousands. They've been watching us since we arrived, Dr. Okafor. They know about the mining operation and they know we're about to destroy their homes. But they're not fighting back because they understand that violence would only make things worse." Ember chose that moment to speak, making a series of melodic sounds that seemed directed at Sarah. The dragon's scales had shifted to warm golds and greens. Colors that Marcus had learned indicated trust and hope. Sarah listened with growing amazement as Ember's vocalizations took on complex patterns that were clearly linguistic. "It's trying to talk to me," Sarah whispered. "Marcus, this is the most significant xenobiological discovery in human history. We have to stop the excavation. We have to protect them." But even as she spoke, both humans knew the magnitude of the challenge they faced. The mining operation represented billions of dollars in corporate investment. The construction crews were already mobilized. The political and economic forces driving the project were not going to be stopped by the concerns of two people, no matter how compelling their evidence might be. Sarah began pacing the laboratory, her mind racing through possibilities. We need more proof. We need documentation that even the corporate board can't ignore, and we need someone with enough authority to shut down the operation while we present our case. Marcus had been thinking the same thing during his journey back to the colony. What about the colonial administration on Earth? Don't they have protocols for situations like this? They do, Sarah said grimly. But the process takes months, even years, and it requires evidence that meets extremely stringent scientific standards. We have perhaps 2 days before the excavation begins. Ember suddenly became agitated, its scales flashing urgent reds and oranges. The dragon flew to the laboratory's communication console and began manipulating the controls with its tiny claws. To Marcus and Sarah's amazement, the console activated, displaying colony-wide communication traffic. It understands our technology, Sarah breathed. Marcus, I think it's trying to help us. The dragon had accessed the administrative files, pulling up the excavation timeline and crew assignments. But more importantly, Ember had found something that neither human had known existed. Hidden in the bureaucratic maze of corporate communications was a standing order from Earth's Colonial Ethics Committee. Any discovery of intelligent alien life was to be immediately reported through emergency channels, with all potentially destructive activities suspended pending full investigation. The order had been buried in routine administrative updates, probably forgotten by everyone at the colony level. But it existed, and it gave them legal authority to halt the excavation if they could provide adequate proof of intelligence. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by the reality of their situation. We still need more evidence than just Ember and the crystals. They'll want proof of the entire civilization. Sarah was already moving, gathering portable recording equipment and scientific instruments. Then we go back to the canyon. Tonight, we document everything we can and transmit it directly to Earth through emergency channels. If we can prove that an intelligent species exists, the law requires that all mining operations be suspended. Ember trilled agreement, its scales brightening to hopeful blues and silvers. The dragon seemed to understand that they were planning to help its people, and its obvious trust gave Marcus the courage he needed for what would certainly be the most dangerous mission of his life. As they prepared for the journey that would either save a civilization or cost them everything, Marcus realized that his lonely exile on Kepler 442b had led him to the most important moment of his entire existence. The grief that had driven him to this distant world had taught him the value of compassion, and that compassion had led him to Ember. Now, that same compassion might be the key to preventing one of the greatest tragedies in human history, but they had less than 48 hours to prove that dragons were real, intelligent, and deserving of the protection that humanity had never learned to give its own world. The race against corporate greed and human destructiveness was about to begin. The second expedition to the Dragon Canyon was vastly different from Marcus's first journey. Dr. Okafor had brought a full array of scientific equipment, including high-resolution cameras, atmospheric analyzers, and quantum communication gear that could transmit data directly to Earth in real time. They traveled in Sarah's research vehicle, a more advanced craft than Marcus's mining mech, equipped with stealth systems and long-range sensors. Ember rode with them openly now, perched on Sarah's shoulder and serving as both guide and translator. The dragon's presence had a calming effect on both humans, its scales maintaining the warm blues and golds that indicated contentment and trust. As they approached the canyon system, Ember began making complex, musical sounds that Sarah was recording and analyzing with growing excitement. The vocalizations have mathematical patterns, she explained, to Marcus as they parked the vehicle, in the same hidden location he had used before. Fibonacci sequences, harmonic progressions, even what appears to be references to quantum mechanics. This isn't just communication, Marcus. This is a sophisticated technical language. The descent into the canyon was faster this time, with Sarah's rappelling gear and Ember's guidance helping them navigate the complex terrain. But as they approached the great cavern where Marcus had first encountered the dragon civilization, something was wrong. The air that had been warm and welcoming before now carried an undercurrent of tension and fear. Ember's scales flickered with nervous patterns as they entered the cavern. The great dragons were still there, hundreds of them, but their positions had changed. Instead of the peaceful dormancy Marcus had witnessed before, they were arranged in what was clearly a defensive formation. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, and their deep voices created a low harmonic that made the entire cavern resonate like the inside of a massive musical instrument. The silver-scaled elder that had first welcomed Marcus descended from the ceiling, but its approach was cautious rather than friendly. Ember flew to meet it, engaging in rapid conversation through color changes and musical tones that were too quick for the humans to follow. Whatever Ember was explaining, it seemed to ease some of the tension, but the great dragon's eyes remained wary as it studied Sarah and her equipment. Marcus stepped forward, removing one of the communication crystals from his pack. The moment the crystal appeared, the atmosphere in the cavern shifted. The defensive formations relaxed slightly, and several of the younger dragons moved closer, their curiosity overcoming their caution. The elder dragon accepted the crystal and held it against its forehead. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every dragon in the cavern began to sing, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to reshape reality itself. The crystal formations in the cavern walls responded to the music, glowing with internal light that painted the entire space in shifting rainbows of color. Sarah stood transfixed, her recording equipment capturing everything while tears streamed down her face. The beauty of what she was witnessing went beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. This wasn't just an alien species. This was a form of consciousness that experienced reality through music, color, and harmonic resonance. The elder dragon approached Sarah directly, extending its massive head toward her in the same gesture of trust it had shown Marcus. When she reached out to touch its scales, the connection was instantaneous. Images flooded her mind, but these were different from what Marcus had experienced. Where he had seen history and culture, Sarah was shown science and mathematics that made human knowledge look primitive by comparison. The dragons had mastered technologies that humanity had barely begun to theorize. They could manipulate matter at the quantum level using harmonic frequencies. They had learned to communicate across interstellar distances through crystal resonance networks. They had developed sustainable energy systems that worked in perfect harmony with planetary ecosystems. Their entire civilization was based on cooperation rather than competition, on harmony rather than domination. But the visions also showed Sarah something that chilled her to the bone. The dragons were not just facing the destruction of their canyon home. The mining operations had already begun to disrupt the planet's harmonic field, the fundamental frequency that held their entire ecosystem together. If the excavation continued, it wouldn't just destroy the dragon cities. It would trigger a cascade failure that could destabilize the entire planet. When the connection ended, Sarah staggered backward, overwhelmed by what she had learned. "Marcus," she whispered, "we're not just talking about preserving a species. The mining operation could destroy the entire planet. The dragon's technology is integrated with Kepler 432b's geology at a fundamental level. If we disrupt it," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood. The corporate planners back on Earth had no idea that they were about to trigger a planetary catastrophe that could kill every living thing on the world, including the human colonists. The elder dragon began making urgent sounds, colors flashing across its scales in patterns that Ember quickly translated. The dragon was telling them that the excavation crews had already begun preliminary work. Seismic charges had been detonated in the outer canyon areas, and the harmonic disruption was spreading faster than the dragons had anticipated. They had perhaps 12 hours before the damage became irreversible. Sarah immediately activated her quantum communication array, establishing a direct link to the Colonial Ethics Committee on Earth. The connection was expensive and used emergency channels, but the situation had moved far beyond normal protocols. As the transmission equipment powered up, she began uploading everything they had recorded, along with her scientific analysis and urgent recommendations. But even as the data streamed toward Earth, both humans knew that 12 hours wasn't enough time for the bureaucratic process to work. Even with irrefutable evidence of intelligent alien life and planetary catastrophe, the committees and review boards would need days or weeks to make a decision. By then, Kepler 442b would be a dead world. Marcus felt despair beginning to overwhelm him until Ember landed on his shoulder, scales glowing with determined gold patterns. The small dragon began making rapid, urgent sounds, and suddenly every dragon in the cavern was listening. The conversation that followed was unlike anything the humans had witnessed before. Dragons of all sizes and ages participated, their voices weaving together in complex harmonics that seemed to carry meaning on multiple levels simultaneously. The elder dragon turned to Marcus and Sarah, its eyes blazing with resolve. Through gestures and crystal-mediated communication, it made them understand what the dragons had decided. They would reveal themselves to the human colonists directly. They would demonstrate their intelligence and their technology in a way that even the most greedy corporate executive couldn't ignore or deny. Sarah shook her head frantically. You can't do that. Humans fear what they don't understand. If you reveal yourself suddenly without preparation, some people will panic. They might try to fight you. The elder dragon's response was patient but firm. The dragons had been observing humans since their arrival on Kepler 442b. They understood human nature better than the humans understood themselves. They knew about fear and greed and the tendency toward violence. But they also knew about human capacity for wonder, for growth, for making the right choice when presented with undeniable truth. The plan the dragons outlined was both simple and terrifying in its scope. At dawn, when the construction crews arrived at the canyon site, they would find the dragons waiting for them, not hidden in caverns but visible, demonstrating their intelligence and their technology. The dragons would share their harmonic sciences with humanity, offering partnership instead of domination. It was the greatest gamble in the history of either species. If humanity reacted with fear and violence, both civilizations could be destroyed. But if humans could overcome their prejudices and see the dragons as equals, as partners, then both species could benefit from technologies and perspectives that neither could achieve alone. Marcus realized that this was why Ember had chosen to return with him instead of staying with its family. The small dragon hadn't just been looking for help to save its people. It had been preparing for this moment, serving as a bridge between two forms of consciousness that had never learned to communicate with each other. As the dragons began to implement their plan, moving through the cavern systems toward the surface with purposeful determination, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. Tomorrow at dawn, two civilizations would meet openly for the first time. The outcome would determine not just the fate of Kepler 442b, but possibly the future of human expansion into the galaxy. The quiet miner who had come to this world to escape his grief had become the focal point of the most important diplomatic contact in human history. And everything depended on whether humanity could prove itself worthy of the trust that a small injured dragon had placed in one lonely man's compassionate heart. Dawn on Kepler 442b came with the usual red-orange glow of the twin suns cresting the canyon walls. The construction crews arrived at the excavation site exactly on schedule, their heavy machinery rumbling across the alien landscape like mechanical beasts preparing for conquest. Foreman Jake Morrison was reviewing the day's drilling assignments when his equipment operator pointed toward the canyon with a trembling hand. "Boss," the man whispered. "What the hell is that?" Rising from the canyon depths came a sight that would haunt Morrison's dreams for the rest of his life. Dragons, hundreds of them, ascending in formation like living jewels against the crimson sky. Their scales caught the morning light and threw it back in cascades of blue, silver, and gold that turned the entire canyon into a prism of impossible beauty. The great elder dragon that Marcus knew rose highest of all, its massive form dwarfing the human construction equipment below. When it spoke, its voice carried across the landscape like the song of planets, deep harmonies that every human felt in their bones rather than heard with their ears. The dragon was not threatening or aggressive. It simply existed, magnificent and undeniable, proof that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Marcus and Sarah stood at the canyon's edge, watching as the first contact between their species unfolded below. Ember perched on Marcus's shoulder, its scales flickering with nervous energy as it watched. Its people reveal themselves to the humans who had come to destroy their home. The reaction among the construction crews was everything Sarah had feared and more. Some men dropped their tools and ran. Others reached for weapons that were laughably inadequate against creatures the size of aircraft. A few stood frozen in terror, unable to process what they were seeing, but Morrison, to his credit, was made of stronger stuff. The foreman had spent his life dealing with the unexpected, and even faced with something beyond his comprehension, his first instinct was to protect his people. He grabbed his radio and began broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "Colony Control, this is Construction Team Alpha. We have a situation at the canyon site. Unknown life forms, large flying creatures, definitely intelligent. Request immediate backup and..." God help me, I think they're trying to communicate. The elder dragon had descended to hover just above the construction equipment, its massive wings creating downdrafts that scattered the red dust in swirling patterns. When it opened its mouth, instead of the roar that the humans expected, it produced a series of harmonious tones that were unmistakably musical. The dragon was singing to them. Marcus activated his communicator and patched into the construction team's frequency. Morrison, this is Marcus Chen from Mining Team 7. Listen to me very carefully. These creatures are intelligent. They're not attacking you. They're trying to establish communication. Do not under any circumstances fire weapons at them. Chen? Morrison's voice was tight with stress. What do you know about these things? Before Marcus could answer, Dr. Okafor took control of the communication channel. Foreman Morrison, this is Dr. Sarah Okafor, Chief Xenogeologist. I am ordering you to stand down all aggressive actions immediately. These beings are a sentient species native to this planet. Any hostile action against them will be considered a violation of Colonial Protocol 7 regarding intelligent alien contact. The mention of official protocols seemed to steady Morrison's nerves. Whatever was happening was beyond his pay grade, but at least someone in authority was taking charge. Copy that, Dr. Okafor. My teams are standing down. But what do you want us to do? These things they're incredible. The elder dragon seemed to understand that the immediate threat had passed. It settled onto the ground near the construction equipment, its massive form dwarfing the human machinery but showing no aggression. Other dragons began to land around the site, creating a circle that encompassed both the human crews and their equipment. Then something extraordinary happened. The dragons began to work. Using their natural abilities and what could only be described as technology, the dragons started to demonstrate their mastery over the planet's geology. They sang in complex harmonies, and the crystal formations in the canyon walls responded, growing and shaping themselves into intricate patterns. The dragons showed the humans how they could encourage plant growth, purify water sources, and even influence weather patterns through their harmonic sciences. One young dragon, not much larger than Ember, approached Morrison's excavation equipment. Instead of attacking or interfering with it, the dragon began to examine the machinery with obvious curiosity. Its scales flickered with colors that Morrison somehow understood indicated friendly interest. When the dragon touched the drilling apparatus with one careful claw, the metal began to resonate with the same harmonic frequencies the dragons used in their own technology. Morrison watched in amazement as his drilling equipment was transformed. The dragon's touch had somehow upgraded the machinery, making it more efficient, less polluting, and capable of extraction techniques that would cause minimal environmental damage. The creature was showing him how human and dragon technology could work together, instead of in opposition. Similar scenes were playing out all around the construction site. Dragons were demonstrating to individual humans how their respective technologies could complement each other. They showed ways to extract minerals without destroying ecosystems, to build structures that enhanced rather than disrupted natural harmonic fields, to create energy systems that drew power from the planet's core frequencies without depleting or damaging them. Marcus and Sarah descended into the canyon as quickly as they could, arriving at the construction site to find a scene of controlled chaos. Humans and dragons were working side by side, with the dragons patiently teaching and the humans struggling to understand concepts that challenged everything. They thought they knew about technology and civilization. Ember flew from Marcus's shoulder to join a group of young dragons who were demonstrating crystal cultivation techniques to a fascinated group of human engineers. The small dragon that had started this entire chain of events was now serving as a translator and cultural bridge. Its scales glowing with the warm colors that Marcus had learned indicated happiness and fulfillment. But even as this miraculous scene of interspecies cooperation unfolded, Marcus knew that the real test was yet to come. The construction crews were just workers following orders. The decisions about Kepler 442b's future would be made by corporate executives and government officials who were sitting in comfortable offices light years away. As if summoned by his thoughts, Administrator Weber's voice crackled over the emergency communication system. All personnel at the canyon site, this is Colony Control. We have received reports of unknown alien entities. All humans are ordered to evacuate the area immediately while we assess the threat level. Morrison looked around at the dragons who were peacefully sharing their knowledge with his crews, then keyed his communicator with determination that surprised even himself. Colony Control, this is Morrison. There is no threat. Repeat, there is no threat. These beings are demonstrating advanced technologies that could revolutionize our entire operation. Sir, with respect, I think you need to see this for yourself. The elder dragon approached Marcus and touched the communication crystal to his forehead one final time. The vision that filled his mind was different from all the others. This time he saw the future, two possible futures. In one, fear and greed triumphed. Humanity rejected the dragon's offer of partnership, viewing them as obstacles to resource extraction. The mining continued, the harmonic fields collapsed, and Kepler 442b became a dead world, another casualty of human expansionism. In the other future, the two species learned from each other. Dragon harmonic science combined with human engineering to create technologies that could heal damaged worlds and support vast populations without environmental destruction. The partnership spread beyond Kepler 442b, with dragons and humans working together to explore the galaxy as allies rather than conquerors. The choice between these futures would be made in the next few hours, as news of the contact spread throughout the human colonies and back to Earth. But Marcus realized that the most important choice had already been made by a small, injured dragon that had decided to trust a lonely human with the fate of its entire species. Ember landed on his shoulder one last time, scales glowing with every color Marcus had ever seen and several he hadn't. The dragon's song was pure joy, the sound of a being that had successfully bridged two worlds and brought them together in friendship rather than conflict. Marcus Chen, who had come to Kepler 442b to escape his past, had instead discovered his future, and in saving one small dragon, he had helped to save two civilizations from the darkness of their own limitations. The baby dragon that had clung to him in trust and desperation had taught him that compassion, not conquest, was humanity's greatest strength. The universe was vast and full of wonders beyond human imagination. But the most important discovery wasn't in distant stars or alien technologies. It was in the simple truth that intelligence in all its forms deserved to be met with understanding rather than fear, with cooperation rather than domination. As the two sons of Kepler 442b climbed higher into the alien sky, humans and dragons worked together to build something that neither species could have achieved alone. A future based on harmony instead of conquest, on wisdom instead of greed, on the recognition that the universe was large enough for all its children to thrive. The age of true galactic civilization had begun with a single act of kindness toward a small, frightened creature that had nowhere else to turn. And Marcus Chen, looking at the impossible beauty of two species learning to trust each other, finally understood that some journeys lead not away from home, but toward a home larger and more wonderful than anything one species could build alone.